Okay, well, I think we can start. And I wanted to, first of all, introduce myself. My name is Mireya Maki. I'm the Interim Director for Kickstart Venture Services. For those of you who are not so familiar with us, we are a department within UNC that supports startups that are related to the research at UNC. And we're more than happy to engage with you, with all of your startups, and help support you in the future. And for today, we have a fantastic webinar for you. It's startups supporting startups and providing advice on the success and persistence during these tough economic times. We have a great set of panelists today. So today's webinar is going to be in a panel format. I ask everybody of you to please share any questions that you have throughout this chat, in the chat version of the webinar. So if you click on chat, you'll be able to post your questions there. And one of our team members, Judy Prasad, here also, which is our Kickstart operations and coordination manager, program manager for Kickstart, she will be receiving all those questions and then posting them as well to the panel. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the different panelists. First of all, we have Ricky Spero from Redbud Labs. He is the founder and CEO of Redbud Labs, that came out of our UNC research from Rich Superfine's laboratory. He stepped into the role as a CEO in 2015. And the company, and he'll tell you a little bit more about this, does microfluidic components. And they also, under his leadership, established manufacturing operations and have been able to raise more than 11 million in funding. Previously, he served as vice president of product development in Redbud, and he had a PhD and MS in physics at UNC-Chapel Hill and BS in physics from Middlebury College. So, Ricky, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Redbud?
Yeah. So. Thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me. So we're a component vendor, like you said. We're based in RTP here in North Carolina, and we have a novel material. We make artificial cilia. So it's a film, a thin silicone film that have microposts that are about 50 microns long and 4 microns in diameter, and we can make them move with magnetic fields. And we use that as like a fluid processing technology. So we make chips that improve reagent storage and resuspension and improve reaction yield in life science consumables. So point of care molecular diagnostics is a really interesting area for us, and right now an interesting area for everyone in the world. So COVID has definitely had an impact on our business.
Great. Let me introduce you to our second panelist, David Spratte from Carpe. He also is a UNC graduate. He graduated in 2017 as a Robertson Scholar with degrees in health policy and management and chemistry. And then, like some of you here in the audience, he considered going on a startup route and went to work full-time on Carpe after graduation with Casper, his co-founder here. And he'll tell you a little more about the technology that was inspired, as he says, by his incredibly sweaty hands that catalyzed Carpe. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Carpe?
Yeah, I first appreciate you inviting me to be here. I have no idea how I made it on this panel with the other people here. But Carpe is just a sweat management brand, sweat control for all areas of your body. So, you walk into a retail aisle right now, most everything is for the underarms. And we basically started Carpe on the premise that there are millions and millions of people out there that are fed up with their sweaty hands, including myself and my co-founder, sweaty faces, sweaty feet, sweaty, under breast, chest, groin, you name it. And really tackling those problems at the source. So creating antiperspirant, over-the-counter, and cosmetic solutions for, sweaty everything.
Great. And our third panelist is Marty Waters from Wilson Sonsini, which some of you might know is a very important law firm in the United States. It specializes in business, securities, and intellectual property law. And Marty is a corporate and securities partner in the San Diego office. So he's joining us from San Diego at the moment, and he's a member of Wilson Sonsini's board of directors. Again, he's one of the founding partners of the San Diego office and their Southern California corporate practice. And he has more than 25 years of experience providing corporates and securities counsel to high growth and private companies. And he has worked with numerous life science companies, helping them start, build, and just going all the way through IPOs and strategic partnerships. So he is very well aware of many startups, some of which are from UNC. And he represents, again, many public companies in the council capacity and investment banks. So we also appreciate him being here to offer guidance and what he's seen with many of his startup clients. Marty, would you like to tell a little bit more about Wilson Sonsini?
Oh, sure. So Wilson Sonsini is a sort of a unique law firm in that we focus exclusively on representing technology and life sciences companies, basically from even before their inception through their exit. And if they exit in an IPO, we'll continue to represent the company after IPO. And we've done that with Google, which we incorporated and still represent. Did that with Apple, which we incorporated and do some work for them now, although they create a lot of conflicts for us. And then on the life sciences companies, similar success with things like Illumina and Genentech. So it's an unusual model in the sense that we get involved with companies even before they're formally formed, and we'll help the founders figure out what the right strategy is for formation and what the right strategy is for capitalization and financing. And then we'll also uniquely put our own cash in the companies alongside our legal services typically. So it's a nice model, and we like doing it.
Great. And last but not least, we have Ben Scruggs from Hatteras Venture Partners. And also, as many of you will know, Hatteras is a very important venture capital firm here in the region. They work with a lot of our life science companies, but not just life sciences. And Ben is an associate at the Hatteras Venture Partners in Durham. He supports due diligence and deal flow processes, and he really focuses on therapeutics. So again, many of the things that we have coming out of UNC. He's also board in some of these companies: Dropworks, Graber Vision, Myeloid Therapeutics, QPEX Biopharma, and Threefold Therapeutics. Before that, he was a postdoctoral fellow in epigenetics and stem cell biology laboratory at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And he has performed research in genomics, metabolism, RNA biology, and transcription regulation. He received his BE in biomedical engineering from Vanderbilt and a PhD in molecular cell biology from Washington University in St. Louis. Ben, would you tell us a little bit more about Hatteras?
Sure, thanks. It's great to be here this afternoon and look forward to the conversation. Our team at Hatteras, we are investors in early stage companies in the healthcare space. We really cover all aspects of healthcare, everything from therapeutics to med device, diagnostics, and healthcare IT. I would say our sweet spot is investing at the seed or Series A stage. We love to invest in companies that are local. We've invested in a number of companies coming out of UNC and Duke as well. And we are investors throughout the United States. So thanks for the invitation to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
Thanks. So to start some of the questions, we would like to ask particularly both the startups, and Ricky, you kind of touched on a little bit on kind of pivoting a little bit towards COVID, So we would like to hear, and, again, thinking from the perspective of the audience, which are mostly startups or people interested in doing the startups, how have you dealt with this? Have you tried to, what sort of changes have you done in your product development, and what's driving you to make those decisions? Why don't we start with Ricky, and then also we'd like to hear from you, David, as well.
Yeah, so we make components that go into, among other things, point of care molecular tests. So for folks that aren't in this world, molecular tests are where you're looking for like a DNA signature, or in the case of COVID, an RNA signature. So you're looking for the genetic signature of something. It could be a cancer mutation, or it could be an infectious disease. And our technology is the most relevant in point of care devices, so compact, where you need the answer fast, and you need kind of a naive user to be able to operate the test. That's obviously extremely relevant to the kinds of testing that people now urgently want. But it was also the thing that we were focused on before. And so we haven't actually changed our product development. What's happened is the world is now looking at this problem very intensely. And there are a whole new crowd of people that are interested in finding novel solutions for what kinds of tests can be built and how to get them built. So we ended up getting, the other thing to understand about us is we're a component vendor. So we don't build diagnostic systems. We make, we want to make the microprocessor for the computer, right? We don't want to make the whole computer. And so we started getting inbounds from device developers, system developers, people with biochemistry that wanted to go do a COVID test. We started to get inbound related to COVID back in February. And so it's more that our customers have encouraged us or have brought us in on projects where that's relevant. The thing that we have had to change is operations, because we are definitely not a virtual company. I'm sitting at home right now because I mostly work on a computer, but more than half of our people have to be in the lab. And so we did have to think very carefully about how we could do that safely. And we've made a lot of adjustments in order to accommodate that.
Well, that's good to hear that you've been able to find a plan that works for the companies, for the company and your employees. Yeah. And on that note, why don't we also ask David how you also, changed either your production or pivoting towards COVID research? Yeah,
yeah, for sure. So we'll give you the whole background on COVID, the impacts on our business and the actions that we've taken, and they can answer any more specifics after the fact. But overall, my co-founder was pretty on top of everything in January, and tracking everything on COVID Twitter before things started to really spiral. So we took pretty early action to move all of our production and manufacturing of components like tubes or bottles or whatever that we make in China to southern China. And then when things really started hitting, the business was impacted in a significant way on the sales side. The supply chain was fine because we had already focused on that. But on the sales side, the Amazon channel was really hit hard because they just couldn't ship out product in time. So it'd take a month to get product to customers. Our website fared pretty well. People could still buy direct, but then brick and mortar retail like CVS and Target took about a 65-70% hit. So in terms of how we responded to that, we really thought about, okay, sales are hit hard. How can we come out of this situation a better business? Sales may be lower, but how can we emerge with a stronger foundation that we can then scale from post-COVID? And honestly, it was selfishly a nice shakeup. When you're very focused on hitting your budget numbers and hitting the goals that you've set out to meet projections or to exceed them, it's very easy to get stuck in your ways about how you do certain things. And COVID honestly forced us to start from scratch, start from first principles, and rethink everything that we were doing. And we started to think about what we can control. So we can control cash flow, we can control our marketing, and we can control how we invest our time. So on the cash flow side, we were really aggressive about applying for PPP and got about $150,000 of funding from that, which is all forgivable. So that was a huge win. And we pretty immediately made a spreadsheet of every single thing that we spend money on. And we made significant cuts outside of people. We kept every single person on to software to freelancers to pretty much everything, and then negotiated all of our agencies down and got really significant savings from agencies and partners, manufacturers, everyone, 3PL, and that helped a lot. And everyone's pretty understanding. And then on the marketing side, we really kind of rethought our channel strategy. The media landscape was completely changing. So TV rates, big advertisers were dropping out. And so there were openings to get really low cost media. And same thing on Facebook. We really hadn't invested a lot in Facebook. And so we started thinking about longer term projects and the need to build a second engine. So starting to invest in just learning that channel a lot more while taking advantage of a new channel like TV, an existing channel like TV and just lower rates. And then really starting new initiatives like Quarantine Chronicles and podcasting, just starting to create a lot of content. And that goes into the third piece, which is how we think about investing our time. If we couldn't control what was happening in brick and mortar and what was happening on Amazon, we couldn't control how we were spending our time and what we were investing that time in. And so we started thinking about more longer term projects. If sales aren't, if we have an excuse essentially for lower sales and we don't want to spend unsustainably to meet sales goals, then how can we invest our time in longer term projects? So we really started revamping our entire website experience. We're going to make a move to Shopify from a custom platform that's a little more scalable. We're moving 3PL partners to someone that's more scalable. We invested a lot of time in product development, still sticking to our core mission and core values. We're not going to try to deviate from who we are and start making hand sanitizers or masks because it wouldn't make sense for the brand. And focusing on content creation and that kind of one-on-one relationship with the consumer and that customer experience, things that can take a back seat to growth initiatives and growth goals, and things that are really important for the long-term value of the business that we really started to invest more of our time on. So that's kind of what happened, what is happening, and things have started to recover incredibly well, but there's still a lot of opportunities right now because of coronavirus and what the impact that's had on the market as a whole, and kind of how we can continue to grow the business within that. But it took a lot of thinking and positioning to figure out where the growth opportunities were based on everything that was happening.
Well, that's a great advice and a great, really, just the strategy you've taken. So Marty, we've heard of from the two startups. So Ricky mentioned, that they were trying to really, cater to some of those opportunities in the marketing with their existing product development, really targeting the opportunities that COVID maybe was placing with their existing product line. Also, the hurdles that they've kind of had to address in the lab to ensure safety and operations and the challenges of working remotely. And from David, who's really told us a little bit about both the negotiating down costs with your partners and really trying to position the new opportunities for growth for the company, kind of rethinking the business strategy, trying to, again, secure loans through PPE. What else have your clients had to adapt under COVID-19? What do you think are the biggest hurdles that they face during this time? Do you see similar situations to both Redbud and Carpe?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting crisis in the sense that it's the first time I can remember a crisis, and I've been doing this since '91, where every one of our clients, regardless of stage, regardless of industry, regardless of product type, is affected. Some are affected positively. We have companies that had drugs in the pipeline that they could quickly flip to a COVID-19 vaccine or a COVID-19 drug that might help people stay off ventilators. We've had folks that are in the grocery delivery business whose businesses have quintupled in a couple of months. But on the other hand, you have people that are making software products or software as a service for event planning. Their business is zero. Or you have people that are doing things in the hotel industry or the restaurant industry, and their businesses had gone from being high flyers with high valuations and bright futures and big plans to having to completely reconsider everything from the ground up. So I think both Dave and Ricky have done the right thing, which is get all hands on deck and look at the business from top to bottom, and how first how the COVID crisis is impacting the business, and secondly what the business should do in terms of remediation of that impact. I think the biggest issue that we now face at this stage in the crisis is what to do about employees and how to get back into our customers, right? So there's two issues there. One is the business have been put in a very, very difficult position, even our own, where you've employed people and they in many cases need to be on site doing things, and particularly if you're in a life sciences company with a laboratory where they have to be in the lab with the equipment. But the way the governors have sort of done this in various states, it's put the companies in a very bad position in the sense that you need people to come back to work, but you're in a position where if you make them come back to work and they get sick, you're gonna potentially have liability. So I think the biggest challenge we face at this stage in the crisis is getting those employees back, and then also getting our employees into other people's businesses, whether it's people to go into clinical sites to monitor trials, or people that need to go in and they actually can't do the sales process by Zoom or some other medium. They actually have to be in an office demonstrating a piece of equipment, or helping a doctor use a piece of equipment on a cadaver or things like that. You need to be able to convince those hospitals and those doctors' offices that it's safe for your employees to come there. So on the getting people back to work side, you need to be prepared to test employees, take their temperatures. You need to develop a screening questionnaire that everybody can either sign every day or do at home before they come to work. You need to take steps to provide a safe physical workplace, providing them with PPE and other things like that. You need to identify, engage, and figure out who the high-risk employees are, and then be also prepared to respond to employees' own concerns and fears about actually working in this environment. And each of those issues, unfortunately, is different depending on where the employee is located. Sometimes state by state, sometimes county by county. So you need to make sure that you're coming up with a plan for your employees wherever they are. And then the next side of it is, now you've done that for your employees, you need to convince your customers that it's safe for them to interact with your employees. And so you need quite a bit of work there. One of the things we've done in response to that is we actually a number of years ago, we bought a software company that makes software as a service legal products. And we made a product for CCPA compliance, and we made a product for GDPR compliance. And so one of the things they were able to do is they were quickly able to come up with a very, very inexpensive and effective product that allows companies to do all of this work, come up with all these procedures, come up with all their compliance reports on a state by state or a county by county basis. So you can check that out. It's the company's called 650, spelled out SIXFIFTY, and they've got a number of sort of COVID-19 response products that are going to help you get your employees back in the office without creating liability for the business, and also give you certifications and things like that you can take to a customer's office and say, it's safe for me to be here. I've done all this stuff over the last several weeks, and I've got a clean bill of health from my company, so you should let me in the premises. And I think that's gonna let people get back to the product, the selling of products and services, which is how these companies are going to get back on track.
No, that is great. And as you know, many of the startups that we work with and many of the people on the call have some sort of relationship to research, and therefore have to be in a lab setting, as Ricky was explaining earlier as well. And it's getting the employees into the lab that is also can be a little bit of a tricky situation. Besides those operations, I think many of the companies are struggling, financially for the reasons that we were talking and discussing about, is like not being able to sell products. So I would like to hear from the companies, and also from Ben and Hatteras, how are you handling your investments currently? What sort of companies, technologies are you looking for? Have you changed in any way the scope of interest in what you're investing in? And thinking of, many of the companies that are raising investment into startups, it's important to know where the opportunities are. And we would like to hear the perspective also from investors as to what they're looking for during this financial times.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, we very much are still actively looking for new investments, but largely the focus that we've had has not changed. I would say that the types of companies that we looked for before all of this started is what the same thing that we would look for today. I think it's easy to see a number of companies that have adjusted. I think both Ricky and David have pointed out that it's necessary for companies to be able to adapt to what has happened during this particular situation, and that's very helpful for companies to be able to make the most out of what's happening and continue to make things move along. But I think in terms of areas that we focused on, at least in the healthcare sector, areas that we found exciting before are still the same. If anything, I would say platform technologies, things like cell and gene therapy, where there had been a lot of interest previously, is still an exciting area. If that platform happens to be amenable in some way to COVID, then that's great. I would say in general, we have not been looking for pure plays on the pandemic itself. And so we've had a couple of portfolio companies that have started to develop their own vaccine or diagnostic test because that was directly applicable to what was already in their pipeline, and it was sort of a natural fit. In the case of some companies, it may have actually been advantageous for those companies to adjust their manufacturing strategy to add in a COVID vaccine, and that would actually help their pipeline in the long run. And those are the things that we've been thinking about. So I think there's been a large turn to looking inward at our current portfolio companies and making sure that if there is an opportunity that they are trying to figure out how to adjust for it. But most importantly, trying to figure out how to adjust their runway to be able to make it through what the next year or two will look like, which is largely uncertain at this point. So I think overall, we're still looking for new opportunities, but it's still largely across the board.
And have you had any difficulties engaging with potential startups of interest virtually through events?
Yeah, so so we have been making new investments during this time, but largely those were companies that we knew, but before all of this started happening. There have been Zoom is something I think we're all experts at this point, and meeting new companies through Zoom is definitely something that we've been doing on a daily basis. I think we have yet to make an investment in someone we haven't met in person. I would say in our history, we have never done that, but actually have one in the pipeline where that is soon to happen. And what's been interesting in that case is that it's been a situation where the co-investors that will come into that deal with know the company very well and have had a long history there. And so we can rely on the relationship that they've had. And so that's been the substitute. I think as we all know, there's no real substitute for getting to know people in person when you're starting to build a long-term relationship with investors in a company. But we've all had to try to be creative in that sense. So we've definitely been more open-minded about it.
Thank you. And the question again for Ricky and David is: have you had on the other flip of that side, any engagement with investors or strategic partners at this time, remotely, or any other creative ways that you managed to engage with investors or other strategic partners, like virtual events or anything else?
So I guess I can start. I guess let me start with our financing strategy. So we we've always had three legs on the stool. So for us, it's always, everyone thinks about it. Equity investors, everyone thinks about customer revenue. And the third leg on the stool for us is non-dilutive. And we're not the only company in town that does that, but we might be the only one that talks about it as often as we do. For us, the SBIR program at NIH is really important, and it's been critical to us being able to develop the technology and get it ready for market, and continues to be important for us to do product development or technology development alongside what our customers are asking us to do. We have always been pretty light on the equity investment side. We've done some angel investment, and we had just started in January, started tapping some people on the shoulder to see about doing another angel round. And by late February, it became clear that just wasn't going to happen, and we just stopped. It wasn't worth it. When you see the stock market drop by 30%, no one's going to go have that conversation. So instead, I like the Ben, your comment about looking inward. We did a lot of that too, not just the kind of introspection at the beginning, but we're now looking for things that we can double down on internally that are good investments, not just for the next month or the next quarter or the next year, but for the lifetime of the company as a private entity. And so we've put a lot of grants out for review, and we have some partners, potential strategic partners, and we've continued to go chase them down. And so the partnership side and the grant side have been very, very active. The equity investment side, we stopped paying attention to that spigot, and we figure we'll come back to it when we have some news and when their world has changed a little bit.
To add to that, Ricky, I think many of the startups we work with have used a lot of these more quiet months when they have reduced their activity in the labs and other activities with their startups to really focus on the SBIR and STTR program, which again, for everybody here in the webinar, they're just fantastic programs. If you're not familiar with them, please get in touch with us. We're more than happy to let you know more about those. We work with very good grant writing service providers as well that can potentially help you and your startup if you have some sort of relationship to UNC research. So do get in touch with us. It's again, fantastic resource to raise non-dilutive funding. David.
Yeah, so we were in a pretty solid cash position. We had just raised a round in mid-2019, so it was not on our minds. Most of our investors, were actively reaching out to us and all of their portfolio companies just to check in and make sure that we were in a good cash position and that we were taking all the right steps. And, from my point of view, it seemed like, all of the investors in our space, in the consumer space, were really focused on existing portfolio companies and making sure that the ones that they were really focused on and confident in were going to make it through, and were going to offer support to those that, they really believed in and made sure that COVID wasn't the reason that they fell out. So that's what it seemed like from my perspective. Again, we didn't need any funding. We weren't actively looking for any. And, in times like these, cash is always king. So that's been our focus in terms of just, really making sure we're preserving cash to make sure we're prepared for anything else.
Thank you. No, and that's also very important. Marty, so again, you work with a lot of clients as well, other sources of funding, that have come up and recently because of the pandemic are the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. So as we're talking about financing, have any of your clients applied for that? How successful have your companies been in that? Would you recommend it? Yeah. Anything that hurdles or deadlines we should be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So we've had a number of clients apply for it. We've had a few clients apply for it and then immediately withdraw from it. It's been a little bit of a moving target, thanks to the Treasury Department, because I think they rushed it out and they didn't really have the regs sort of straight, and they've sent out these FAQs on kind of a dribble them out basis. And each time they send out an FAQ, everybody kind of goes back and looks and try to see if they've violated federal law with the potential for penalties and imprisonment, and hope they haven't, right? So the main thing on the PPP stuff, really where it all shakes down to, is necessity. I think everybody in the first couple of weeks of the PPP was rushing to the idea that, hey, this is just free money. And one of the things we counsel people, having seen this movie before in the financial crisis, is, yeah, it's a lot of free money, but remember, just because you take it doesn't mean you're not going to get sued by the government as soon as the crisis is over. So the thing we had to focus people on really were two things. One were the affiliation rules. So if you have investors that are large VCs and things like that, you have to make sure that because of the way your documents are worded and because of the ownership positions of those VCs, that you're not affiliated with all of their other portfolio companies and all the employees of those portfolio companies for purposes of determining whether you're a small business that can actually apply for the loan. So there's each industry has a number of employees that you need to be below that number in order to be considered a small business. It's usually 500, but it might be 1,000, for instance, in the biotech industry. And when you're determining whether you qualify under that, you have to look at whether or not you have you're considered under the SBA rules, which are different than many other rules of affiliation, to be affiliated with those owners of your company. So if you have a controlling owner where somebody owns more than 50% of the voting stock, you're going to be affiliated with that owner and all the other companies that are under common control with them, and all the other employees under of those companies, for purposes of counting your number. So we had to get people focused on that, and that was very opaque in the sense that the SBA rules are not really that clear, and the Treasury announcements that they sent out to try to clear that up, actually made some things more clear and some things less clear. So thank you for that. And then the other thing we had to focus people on was really the necessity. So one of the representations you have to make, which is under penalty of perjury, which carries some pretty enormous penalties potentially, since it's a government guaranteed loan, is you have to be able to represent that the proceeds of the loan you're getting are necessary for the continued operations of the business in response to the current economic environment. And it doesn't say nice to have or we would like to have, it says necessary. And so a lot of people stampeded, and I'm sure you've read the reports about some of the restaurant chains stampeded towards getting huge loans when they had lots of cash on their balance sheet, when they had access to credit lines, when they had access, they were public companies with access to public markets. In some cases, they had just raised money. They're private companies where they have tranches in the financing and they knew that they were going to be able to meet the milestone and get the tranche. All of those things are fact-intensive analyses that go to whether it's necessary or not. Now, originally, it was just sort of, is it necessary or not necessary? And it was very high risk if you had any of those things I just described, like a credit line, for example. Or if your sales were improving because of COVID, you shouldn't be applying for the loan. The Treasury then came out with some more FAQs to try to provide some initial clearance on that. And so they said, public companies should consider themselves not to be not to be meeting this necessity challenge because they have access to capital markets, particularly if they have large market caps and they have access to those markets. Then they came out with a subsequent FAQ that said anybody who's borrowing less than 10 million, we're creating a safe harbor, but they didn't describe what the safe harbor means. So what the practice we're sort of advising people is, if you're borrowing less than $2 million, it's a lower risk that you're ever going to have an issue with your necessity. And they've said that they're only going to spot check audits of loans below 2 million. They're going to audit every loan that's 2 million or above. So there's a different risk profile depending on how much you're getting. But it doesn't change the fact that you still need to make this necessity test. What it does is really set up a rebuttable presumption. They're going to presume that companies that are borrowing less than $2 million, the funds were necessary for them when they made the application. But that's rebuttable with facts, and there have already been some challenges. There's a couple of cases in Long Island, New York, where they've already prosecuted some folks for taking loans that they deemed were fraudulent. So the main thing the company needs to do first is figure out whether they meet the standard on the affiliation rules, which most of the early stage companies will, but the middle stage and later stage startups that have a syndicate of investors may not. If they don't, there are things you can do in changing things like your protective provisions and some of the blocks that those investors may have on board actions or shareholder actions that you can get them to agree to change. And as long as they agree to change them and that change is permanent and not just temporary, that will remove the affiliation problem. And then all companies, regardless, have to meet this necessity test and be able to show that they're going to be able to withstand a rebuttal presumption that they're necessary. So what does that mean? So first thing you have to do is calculate the amount of the loan you're getting. And then you have to look at your post-COVID plan and the operating plan and post-COVID revised budget. Everybody should have one, right? It's affected their business, whatever their plan and budget was prior to COVID, it's all going to be changed for some reason or another. It might be for the positive, might be for the negative, but it's going to change. Everybody's impacted. Look at that post-COVID plan and see what the impact of the proceeds you're getting is on that plan. If you have, rule of thumb, more than 12 months of operating cash, then you really need to kind of dig down and see, okay, well, getting $100,000 when I've got 18 months of cash and $25 million in the bank, and that money's going to last me through 2022. Is it necessary to get $100,000, and what's the impact on that? If it moves you from having cash through 1 month in 21 to another month in 21, it's probably not going to meet the test. If you have less than 12 months of cash and you're going to be a going concern, and getting into $100,000 allows you to, keep the lights on for a couple of months or forestall laying off employees or something that has a meaningful impact on your business, I think you're on safe ground. But if you also have access to things like an untapped credit line, or you have investors that have already said they're going to put another $10 million in the company as soon as you hit the tranche, and you're hitting the tranche based on the facts and circumstances, you need to consider all of that stuff, because it's just not worth the trouble of taking this money and having a problem later if you get challenged. That would be, it would be a very serious problem for the people that sign the representation, and a very serious problem for the company, maybe even a deadly problem for the company if they have that kind of investigation, because it would be hard to get a buyer to buy the company if you have the government coming down on you.
No, that's certainly great advice. And again, for all of our startups, again, many, as Marty was saying, if you have an investor in your company already, if that could disqualify you from being able to apply for the act. So it's definitely worth considering, but with seeing whether there's the real need for it as well. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, Marty, but you had to be in operations for more than a year to apply?
No, you just have to be in operations. You had to already be in operations from, I think, February 15th of 2020.
Okay.
The company had to be in operation.
Yeah, because that would also affect many of our just recently incorporated startups as well.
Yeah, and you have to actually have been paying somebody, either a consultant or you filing a 1099 or having W-2 employees by a certain date.
Yeah, and to give an example of kind of what we did, just to cover all of our bases, the basically $150,000 that we got in funding obviously had to go to rent and employees, utilities, and that basically allowed us to keep everyone on. And so just documenting everything and really having an entire document showing the impact on sales, the impact on the business, and kind of what was happening, and then how that money helped, help pay for rent, help keep the employees on, and was necessary to the business, was something that we did to just make sure we were covering all of our bases. So in the unlikely chance that we did get audited, it would just be a simple, here's the report that we have prepared for you to kind of look into, why this was necessary for our business.
And tactically, one thing you should do one thing you should do is the part of the loan that you're expecting to have forgiven, which would be the payroll costs, the payment of interest on mortgage obligations, rent payments on leases, and utility payments during the measurement period. You should keep that in a separate account so that you can simply show them the balance, show them where the money went, and say, my loan is forgiven.
Great. Thank you.
Great. And also from the startups, Ricky, I don't know, as you've handling the crisis, are there any other areas where you can try to maybe, again, save on finances, in terms of intellectual property or other things like, that are heavy costs for a typical small startup company? Have you had to make any decisions or anything for moving forward with during this time? Yeah.
So we're one of those companies that's countercyclic, right? That the circumstances, at least in the aggregate, are likely to affect us positively. So of course, we spent some time talking about this. How careful do we have to be? How much do we have to adjust in what ways? What kinds of risk mitigation? But what we decided when we looked at this was actually the plan that we had in January still looks good. There are certain things that might happen by July that we're anticipating will happen. If they don't happen, then maybe we need to adjust. But that angel round I mentioned before, that was a nice to have. And so when we said we're not going to do that, we said we're going to focus on these other things. We're going to be able to finance the company and move forward and make progress. But if some of those assumptions turn out to be wrong, there's a line in the sand coming up, and we'll have to adjust. And so we definitely have contingency plans for when that happens. Having said that, at least in our case, IP is not where you make those cuts, right? If we get bought, it's for the IP. Our business is intellectual property. So we can always think about whether the application development we're doing is spread more widely or needs to be more narrow than it currently is. We always have had an eye on you. One of our if any of you know Joe McMahon in town, he was the CEO at KBI. He was the first one to say to me, you can't do too much, but you have to do enough. And so we talk about that all the time. What's enough? What's the right number of things to be working on that's still not too much? And so that it just causes you to go back and look at that lens and say, did we get it right? It was encouraging to go through all of that exercise and say, actually, no, it seems like we're on the right track. But we also have to assume that the world isn't going to look normal, whatever that means, for 18 months or 2 years. And so if by mid-year some of our assumptions turn out to be wrong, then we're going to have to make some hard adjustments to understand, to have a plan that gets us through that 18 months, 2 years.
That's great, and that's good to hear. And yeah, like you say, sometimes the most valuable aspect of the company is actually its intellectual property, particularly for university-based startup companies.
Yeah, don't thing that drives your stock price.
Yeah. Ben, obviously you work with a lot of IP-based startup companies. Have you faced any difficult decisions as well with them in terms of reducing either anything with intellectual property or any other aspects of the business that you're recommending them to go forward with?
Yeah, I think IP is something that we have fortunately not had to cross that difficult decision with any portfolio companies to date. I think, in terms of particular headcount, in terms of how particular companies are getting things done in the current environment, be that on rotating people through the lab so that you don't have multiple people in the lab at the same time, is something that companies have started to adjust to. I think it has adjusted the way that companies are thinking about how they are going to continue to build their company over time. I think we've seen more of that as to what are really the critical roles in terms of scaling and being able to continue to build a business. I think there's a lot more discipline in that regard. And I think that's also something that we'll probably continue to have to think about with portfolio companies. I think the style of investments, if there's going to be any shift in what's happening over the next year or so, it might be that you'll see more discipline coming from investors as well. I think the amount of capital that we're deploying at any given time may be smaller, may see more tranche structures, trying to be more resourceful, making sure that we're reserving enough capital for future investments. And so not to try to hinder companies at all. Certainly that's not anything that we would want to do to a portfolio company, but it may impact who can be hired at one particular time or how we think about the IP strategy. So I think this has been brought up before. Thinking through the post-COVID budget is incredibly important and something that all companies need to really dial in on.
Great. And then just, we'd also like to hear from Marty, and because you obviously are a specialist on IP as well, before moving on to questions from the audience. So I think many of the companies that have either raised the non-dilutive funding or already operating, like both Redbud and Carpe, can manage to again secure that intellectual property. But many of the very early stage startup companies that haven't been able to raise funding quite yet, they might be struggling to make some of those decisions as to what should they do in terms of patent families, particularly when they hit national stages or others. Are there any recommendations that you have for them?
Sorry about that. We haven't seen too much change on the IP side. I mean, one of the advantages, the patent office has been operating remotely for a number of years. So this one of the few areas where it really hasn't been affected is the patent office. Over 70% of the examiners, already pre-COVID work from home, so they haven't missed a beat. So the cadence of getting feedback and working with your examiners and the cadence of making filings is really one of the few areas that's not been impacted by COVID. So I think that people should still be pursuing their IP. You can use things like provisional patents very, very cost effectively. It's $250 to file a provisional patent. Obviously, you've got to do the work, but the advantage of the provisional patent is you can put your stuff up there and have a year before you have to, really kind of publish it, so you have time to change it and make changes to it. And we're a first to file, not a first to invent jurisdiction now. So using those provisional patents makes a lot of sense, even in a time like this. If you have COVID-related inventions, the PTO has a fast track program they put in place for COVID-related inventions. So that's actually been a very helpful tool for a number of our clients that have been taking a technology or a drug or therapy or device that they had in development anyway for non-COVID purposes, and being able to sort of fast track their IP strategy using that COVID fast track program. There's been a lot of collaboration amongst companies too, which has actually heated up the IP world for us, because people want to file things more quickly so that they can be in a position to feel comfortable collaborating with others. As far as once you go to the international stage, I mean, there's no avoiding the fees associated with the international stage. The only thing I think people are doing is they're picking a much sharper pencil to which jurisdictions they really need to file in. And they may be saying, hey, there might be regions in Africa where I don't need to protect this. I'll I'll have know-how and things like that, where I can, if I ever enter that market, or the buyer of my company ever enters that market, they're not going to be severely disadvantaged by not having that patent, or maybe Russia or some places like that, where they're just kind of carving up the list a little bit so that they can conserve cash or stretch the cash that's needed for that. And then once companies have an issued U.S. patent, they can utilize the patent prosecution highway, which allows them to take the allowed U.S. patent and duplicate it in many jurisdictions around the world. So that's another way to kind of stretch your dollars for your IP strategy.
That's great. And I know we're kind of running close to the end of the webinar, so I would really like to give opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. I think, Judy, you have a few already.
Hi, yes. Great question from Susanna Harris. And, we have a great question from Susanna Harris from Grant Engine. And I think this is focused actually for all of the panelists. Her question is, should companies be preparing plans A, B, and C for possible trajectories following COVID? Or should they focus on pivoting based on each new update we are getting regarding the pandemic?
Yeah, I can start if you want. I mean, I think everybody needs to have a post-COVID, strategy which outlines the impact and remediation plan. And the remediation plan's got to have different scenarios, right? So, for example, if you're a life sciences company that funded your company to get a certain data read on a trial, and that trial has been delayed, you need to figure out, kind of worst case, best case, middle case, when are you going to get back into the clinic, and when are you going to get the data? Because you probably haven't funded your company through that data read now, right? If you were funded for a couple of, get the data and then be funded for 3 months, and now the earliest you're going to get back into the clinic is 6 months to 9 months delay, and then everything else, the data read and the analysis and collecting the data and all that stuff's pushed out. Now you've got to operate the company for another 6 to 9 months. So I think you need to be funding, you need to have your financing strategy, your regulatory strategies, your IP strategies, all focused on what the realistic scenarios are. And there might be multiple scenarios that you have to plan for.
I think preparing for multiple scenarios is critical at this time. It can be an adjustment in a clinical trial that's on hold. Manufacturing can be put on pause. There are a lot of things that have been impacted pretty much at every level. And that's why almost every company has been impacted in some way. We've talked about non-dilutive funding, and that's definitely having some opportunities in the air there, and knowing that is an option is definitely one trajectory that companies can take right now. I think even in the pre-COVID world, we would always recommend to not depend on that necessarily, but now that there are new opportunities in that area, it certainly makes sense to explore it. And if you can go down that path, great. But having the ability to move away from that, if you need to be able to keep financing the company, have a different plan to be able to extend in that certain way, and know where you're going to cut if something doesn't come through, as opposed to if you can continue to step on the gas if something does pop in. So I think that optionality is critical right now. So I think the different paths is the right way to go right now.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling on this is that good operators, all the operators that I admire, thrive on contingency all the time, whether or not there's a pandemic, right? Good operators always have plans A, B, and C. And the question is, how much does, and the plans A, B, and C are almost always guided by risk in the business, right? Where are the potential landmines? And so the question is, not should I have plans A, B, and C? Yeah, you should. And the question is not, should it be guided by risk? The question is COVID a meaningful risk, or does it change the risk calculus for the business? And if it does, then yeah, it should factor into your plans A, B, and C. And like Marty said, it's hard for me to conceive of a business that doesn't have at least some impact from this. So at a minimum, I think this is why we keep saying it, it certainly should cause some introspection. You got to go back to the list of goals and say, do these still make sense? Are they still feasible? Having said that, I do think there is, separate from that, there's an additional responsibility on operators because of this. You know, so again, Marty, you made some comments about the role of employers and their employees coming back to work and some of the safety issues involved there. What I've found is we have to, just as managers in the business, we have to know what's going on, and we have to be familiar with it. We have to have an opinion about it. It needs to make sense. We need to communicate, over-communicate it to our people. There is not good leadership out there on this, and there's not independent of any individual's politics. There isn't a consensus in our society about what we ought to be doing. And what that means is people have different kinds of information that they're getting, right? Within your company, your employees have different opinions based on what information they're taking in. They have different levels of sophistication in how they process that information. And they may come to different conclusions about what it means for their role in your company, for what they're doing at home, what kind of risks they're exposing themselves and the other employees to. And so we've been very proactive I have been very proactive in our town hall meetings every week. The first thing we've started with for about 18 months, since we seriously started doing manufacturing in-house, we've always started our weekly stand-ups with safety. What safety issues are there? Well, now there's safety issues every week, and sometimes it takes the whole half hour. And so we need to be prepared. I need to be prepared in leading that meeting to have something concrete to say. If someone asks a question about, well, wait a minute, the state's opening back up, and I'm really worried about that, or someone else in the room says, well, we should have been here the whole time. We never should have shut down. As managers, we need to have a way to navigate that and provide some consistent guidance and leadership to the people inside the building, because it's not coming from outside. There's no agreed upon way to do this. So within the culture of the company, there needs to be one message and one plan.
David, do you have any thoughts? And great answer, Ricky. I think because there is no consensus regarding what the next steps for any company should be, that ultimately depends on the leadership of every company to make those decisions. Carpe's definitely done a lot since COVID. And David, if you'd like to add your thoughts to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so sorry again about my Wi-Fi. I didn't hear what Marty or Ben said, but I don't think I can add anything more of value than to what Ricky just said. I think that he hit it pretty spot on. The thing that, in terms of contingency plans, yes, I again agree. We built like 4 different models of, different situations and scenarios and how they could potentially play out, and just making sure that we had enough cash and understanding what we need to do if, any one of those situations unfolded. In terms of kind of taking a step back and not answering that question, but just kind of adding something outside of it in terms of management, to Ricky's point, I think selfishly for founders right now, we're in an unprecedented, we have this unprecedented learning opportunity, a learning opportunity about how to manage morale when everyone's getting punched in the face every single day for a lot of companies. Learning experience in terms of how to manage productivity of a fully remote team or a partially remote team. And finally, how to manage a P&L and manage the overall business during a global pandemic. So I think, that's the mindset that we've tried to take in terms of, this is an incredible learning experience and opportunity. And it's definitely helped us think about things that we wouldn't have otherwise thought of. That's the last thing that I'd add.
David, that makes me think of, if anyone's read The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz has this nice riff about peacetime and wartime CEOs.
Yeah.
And we've been fortunate that this has not yet forced us into wartime, although certain segments in the business have gotten or parts of our team have gotten very intense in the last couple of months. But there's definitely an opportunity to learn what it means to move into wartime, or at least in our case, to plan for wartime, because you can kind of see it over the horizon.
Yeah, spot on.
And those wartime CEOs sweat more too, which is good for David.
And I'm conscious of the time. I think there's one more question we can quickly go through, and then I would just like to hear from everybody else as well, just the final comments or any further recommendations that you would like to give the audience and just UNC startups in general.
So our last question comes from Eric Anderson, and Eric says that he's an ICU nurse who has an LLC but has yet to get any funding. And so he's working on a software platform to deliver the most useful COVID info to bedside clinicians. He's had some pro bono development time, but is doing a lot himself. So his question is, what sorts of funding opportunities would be most useful at this point? I have a feeling I know that most of you would mention the non-dilutive funding opportunities. And just to give a quick plug for that, Innovate Carolina, as well as the SBTDC, is hosting a workshop tomorrow and next Friday. I've put a link to that in the chat. I think that would be extremely useful for a company at this stage, and it's also been mentioned as something that a lot of startups are using during the current economic climate to fund their companies. With that, I would leave it to the panelists to offer this last piece of advice.
I could start if you want. So I think a couple things. First of all, you should really consider losing the LLC as soon as possible. It's just going to be a problem for you with raising money. A lot of folks can't invest in LLCs. Ben's laughing because he can't. But also, if you're a C corp, you can qualify what's called qualified small business stock treatment. So, you have an opportunity to shield up to $10 million of your gains in a sale of the company from tax completely. So that would be an opportunity missed if you don't take advantage of that. And the LLC, the only reason to have an LLC is because it's not a taxpayer, and so there's no corporate tax. But very few of these venture-backed companies, and it sounds like the kind of company you're going to enter into, have a big problem with making profit that they pay a lot of taxes on. So usually what you end up doing is growing the equity value and selling the equity value and getting a capital gains tax on that, not having a corporate level tax. So I would lose the LLC, but that's just free advice. In terms of finding money, I think, if you have a COVID focused technology, there's actually a fair amount of angel activity in this area, believe it or not. Angels are they're still pretty well, most people are pretty well healed. The stock market dipped, but it came back up, and unless their fortunes are tied to a bunch of partnerships that own hotels and restaurants and things like that, they're largely sitting pretty. If they have cash or investments, some of them are getting a lot of capital calls, but sparing that, they're doing okay. And a lot of them like to invest, particularly the family offices, like to invest in things that have some social utility associated with it. And obviously COVID-19 has a lot of social utility associated with it. So we're seeing a lot of angels putting $2-3 million behind COVID testing platforms, software platforms, all sorts of things, kits, and even just information. So I think reaching out to the angel groups right now and seeing which of their members are interested in COVID-19 is probably worthwhile exercise.
On the non-dilutive side, one narrow piece of advice: there's a lot of noise right now because, of course, there are a lot of new dollars flowing in. So there are, in our world, one of the big headlines was NIH has this RADx program, which is $500 million that they're funneling into new diagnostic programs. BARDA is active in this and has, puts a lot of wood behind a few arrows, and will fund big contracts. that tends to, those kinds of headlines, I think, are tempting and distracting for very early stage companies. We, having, reached out to BARDA repeatedly over the years, what we've found is that discipline on the phase 1 and phase 2 NIH SBIRs, and then NSF, depending on what you do, is a much more consistent source of financing, and it can be done. You may get questions about, aren't you distracting yourself, or are you trying to do too much? And there are good ways. If you're getting a lot of those questions, you can send me an email and I can give you a rant on this. But there are ways to manage your business responsibly using those financing mechanisms, and they are much more consistent. It's only once you're to a certain point, and frankly, once you have some familiarity with the language and the pacing and the relationships for these non-dilutive sources, that at least in our experience, the stuff like the BARDA projects or this RADx call or any of the other kind of big headline programs become realistic. That's been our experience. Other stuff happens, so you may have better luck than we did. But if you're going to look at non-dilutive, I'd suggest that you look, particularly if you're at the very early stage, write some phase 1 SBIR applications and just get them out the door. And I think you're much more likely to get some hits there, get some cash in, and you can continue making progress while you occasionally shoot for the moon.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is, navigating the non-dilutive scene can be overwhelming, particularly right now, just given how much noise there is there. I might steer you toward one of the grant writing groups that can really navigate this right now, just to help you distill some of what's out there. The large contracts like from BARDA are probably not the best place to get started. I think that some smaller aspects, particularly to develop a piece of software, could really make you move a lot. And I think it's part of just being resourceful right now. And SBIRs have historically been a great avenue to do that. I also just want to echo what Marty said, because the angel groups right now have been very active in this scene, and it's well worth the conversation. And even if that's not the right fit for you right now, it's a good time to start building a relationship like that. If that could be a path forward for a future source of revenue or a source of investing.
And to echo what Ben is saying, again, we work with STTR and SBIR server providers, as I mentioned earlier. So if you're a UNC startup, we can definitely help you with that. But if not, we're also very happy to make introductions. We know very good groups there as well. And David, any final comments?
Nothing specific to that. I think y'all got great advice from Marty, Ricky, and Ben.
Well, thank you, everybody. I know we went a little overboard on the time, but we really appreciate it. And again, we're very happy to stay in touch and send us any comments or questions, and we'll try to answer them by email. My email address is my first name, Mireya, my last name, .mckee@unc.edu. Thank you, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.